I think it's also very important, Stacy, when you consider all the things that are happening in New York right now, particularly with what happened in December with Luigi Mangione, and obviously right now with the mayor's race, and the fact that Zohran has made probably the central issue of his campaign housing. Like this is in many ways, the one of the two primary issues of our time, healthcare and housing. And I'm curious from a New Yorker's perspective like yours, and it would behoove you to kind of explain to everybody what things are like in the city right now, because I think both of us think that Zohran definitely has a really good chance to win. And I'm wondering how you see that kind of unfolding in terms of not just East New York, but in terms of the city in general, about housing improving as it desperately needs to. And ultimately, if he were not to win, the fear that there could be a lot more Luigi Mangiones that start popping up out there. I mean, something's got to give at some point.
There's so much important. Like I look back at the Kerner Commission when they were pointing out these problems. We have so many big problems, but housing is such a fundamental thing. Like, how do you go forward in life if you're not coming from a good home, a good, safe home? I mean, it's everything. Your home is your sanctuary. It's where you gather your strength to go out in the world. So if you're living in a home that is falling apart, in a neighborhood that's dangerous, how do you succeed in life from that? But I'm not an expert in affordable housing, and I'm trying to learn more about it. But what I see is that developers, when they say, and I feel so naive saying this, but when they say they're going to provide affordable housing, and I look at the numbers, I don't see affordable housing. I see apartments that are below market rate, but they're still not in the range where people like myself could afford to rent them. The only reason I am able to live in New York City is that I lucked into a rent stabilized apartment like around 40 years ago. So my rent has only gone up so much. I don't know how, I don't know where I would live if I didn't have this apartment. I don't know what my life would look like if I didn't have this apartment. It allowed me to be a writer. I mean, I only say that because writers don't always make a lot of money, so I can't afford expensive rent.
No, we're also living in a world today where people do not appreciate reading, writing, and arithmetic, if you will. And that's just an example of how our culture has disintegrated in many ways.
So where does affordable housing come from? It doesn't seem that private developers are the ones that are going to provide it. So
I'm in commercial real estate. Yeah. I can attest to this. And I try to explain to my fellow investors that if people can't afford to live in your home, live in your place, then you have to adjust based on their needs, not yours. This isn't I'm going to get what I'm going to get. No, I think that the country is waking up to this reality that we have to play by a fairer set of rules. Now, of course, the ones who have made a killing for far too long, and I know quite a few of them that own those 100-year-old apartment buildings in Manhattan and the Bronx, even older than that in many cases. And let me assure you that the people that own those buildings don't look anything like the people who live there, and they don't live anywhere near there. In fact, you've got some of the richest real estate investors are slumlords. They don't care one iota about these people. And so while I am not somebody who advocates for the government to run things, there has to be a balance between government and business. And right now we don't have it. And so Zohran's process about how to change the dynamic in the city, just something as simple as we have to do something about rent control. We have to do something about potentially having at least one government-run grocery store in each of the 5 boroughs. And we have to do something about public transportation. And even that slight push Who are the loudest people in the room who scream bloody murder about him trying to do that? The people who have benefited the most from this broken system.
Yeah.
That's the way it goes. And that's why what he's talking about, especially in this moment, is absolutely correct.
Well, that's what in these two threads, one of the things, so I have a million timelines so I could see what was happening every year in every area of life. And one thing I saw was, so you've got financial crimes escalating and you have street crimes escalating at the same time. There was a massive effort to do something about, to put laws in place, minimum sentencing for street crimes. But for the financial criminals, nothing changed. They didn't go after them, even though they were responsible for everything else that followed. And it's still like that today.
I don't think those things are unrelated at all. I think it was very intentional. I think that the street crimes, and especially when I mean, as a child that grew up in the 70s and 80s, and we know looking back about things like what was going on with crack cocaine and what the powers that be were doing to certain neighborhoods to control certain areas. And I think that goes hand in hand with devaluing the property and causing all of these problems in neighborhoods that would have otherwise been doing okay if they had been left alone. And that is something that we just could not tolerate. We could not tolerate poor people, brown people thriving. And any sort of indication that that could happen, well, we can't have that. So how can we profit off of the situation? And I just got, like, listening to all of this, it's very frustrating because to me, the problem really, it's a capitalism problem. This is a capitalism problem. It's yet one more example of something that should be universal basic services, things that satisfy our universal needs as humans that we should be able to get from living in a society and having a civilization. Housing, healthcare, education. These are things that cannot only exist as profit entities. These are things that have to be taken off of the profit table. And I am not averse to people making money as for housing, but there has to be a limit. There has to be a limit to that is reined in when it is something that is a universal basic service. So housing is just one more example that it needs to be taken off of the profit table.
The problem is it's very expensive. I mean, that sounds stupid to say, but the book I wrote before this was about Roosevelt Island in the 19th century when it was called Blackwell's Island. And the city bought it and they used it to build replacement institutions for the institutions that existed in Manhattan. So there were a couple of prisons, there was what they called a lunatic asylum, public hospitals for poor people who couldn't afford private hospitals. And when they started this, they started with the best of intentions. They realized that all their efforts in this area, housing the poor, medical help for the poor, and for the poor with mental illness, they realized they did a bad job and they had to do better. And they just repeated all the same mistakes because when it came down to how much it would cost, they were not willing to spend the money. And so they cut all these corners. And by cutting all these corners, and I don't want to go into this because it's a whole nother subject, but they made everything 1,000 times worse, which is what is happening now. Like, if you're going to, is that me? Do you hear that?
Yeah. Colin, please mute her when Stacy's speaking.
So now I lost my track of thought.
We'll wrap it up.
Okay. Well, I can stop.
No, it's all good. And I think that the essence here is, as Jen was alluding to, we do have a broken system. And nowhere is it more obvious than in New York City. I mean, if you really think about it, it really is an inflection point. Just by Zohran winning the primary, he's a Muslim Indian socialist in the biggest Zionist colonialized city maybe in the world. And he won. And he won convincingly. He didn't even win by a little. He won in the second round, which is the equivalent of basically winning by double digits. And that is unbelievable. In almost any other circumstance, we would never see an outcome like that. But
it's exciting. It's exciting.
It is. And that's why we're cautiously optimistic. I know no matter what, we've seen the letdowns from Bernie, the letdowns from AOC, but there's something about this guy that I think he grasps what this moment is. And I think he understands that he has a lot of people riding on him to make some type of a change. And while that's a much bigger task if you're running for even governor, much less running for president. But mayor, this is an opportunity where I think if he gets it, and especially with the amount of people behind him, I think he's going to have a chance to make some positive change in that city. And if he does, he's going to set a benchmark for a lot of other people to step up, perhaps at a point where maybe they thought they would and never went for it, but now they will. And this story about housing and how these communities have been poorly served deliberately for the purpose of money and power, which should come as no surprise to anybody. I do think that this is a key moment right now. And if anybody wants better insight into that moment, I think taking a look at your book will certainly crystallize in many ways why Zohran won the mayoral nomination in the Democratic Party, which means that he is the favorite to win a few months from now. But the biggest reason he won is because of the housing crisis that exists in a city that has done this, not just to East New York, but to a lot of different neighborhoods so that it benefits the very select few in the places we mentioned, which in many ways is a reflection of the broken system that is capitalism that we're under still.
I just want to add that most of the neighborhoods that were targeted back in the 60s and 70s are still suffering today.
Absolutely. Again, some of them, as we mentioned, have just been gentrified to the hilt, and that's why they're where they are today. But think about, you're in Manhattan?
Yes.
I mean, just think about the Bronx. Think about the fact that the South Bronx, which is one of the roughest areas in the entire city, which is predominantly Black and Latino, is as rough as it gets. And then the North Bronx, which is predominantly Jewish, especially in Riverdale, is safe, clean, and prosperous. And it's been that way for at least 60, 70 years. Nothing's changed. It's exactly the same. And so when we ask ourselves, why doesn't anything change? It's because for very long, I don't think a lot of people truly understood how politics works, but we're in sort of a great awakening period that's happening right now. And I think that that's the biggest reason why you're not going to be able to pull the wool over people's eyes. I mean, Trump is just one part of the phenomena where the corruption is just right in your face. There is nothing going on behind the scenes. It's like right out in the open. And what I've learned is that when it's shoved in your face, most people don't like that. And that's why I believe that the Great Awakening is happening. And I think your story can really help crystallize that for a lot of people who are wondering, how did this happen? How is Zohran in this position? I mean, I still try to explain to people that you don't realize how big a deal this is. Like, this is overwhelmingly huge. This is the biggest political inflection point, in my opinion, since Bernie Sanders won the Michigan primary in 2016. Like, there has been nothing close to this since then. And now we're living in it. The question is, do we get it right this time? And do we prosper from it?